the Vice President of Agriculture, Human and Social Capital at the African Development Bank. Okay, you couldn't see who was down there. Jared Irving, who is the Managing Director at Arch Emerging Markets Partners, and Deepak Bojek, who is the Head of Treasury at Tolaram Group, and Patrice Anakin of the International Fertilizer Development Center, and NGRES Project Director. So I think, what I'd like to start out with is looking at the role of African DFIs in investing and prioritizing food security. And if I can start with you, Serge.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and I'm very pleased to be here, and thanks for the organization, and again, thank you for having me. Well, it is a very important question. It's a very important topic, as the senior ministers rightly pointed out. We have at the West African Development Bank made the decision 2 years back that agriculture has to be considered as a very specific sector. So we have adopted a sectoral approach, which means that we would like to know who are the actors, what is the paradigm, who are the actors, who does what are the multiples, what is the equity, what's the market value, because there is value out there, right? There's strong value out there. So, as you know, we have we have 5 major sectors, which are infrastructure, agriculture, and when it comes to agriculture, it's from one hand, it's food security, which is basically the topic we will elaborate down the roads, and on the other hand, it's everything related to either agro or agribusiness. Then energy, human capital, health and education, and last, but surely not the least, everything related to either tourism, real estate, affordable economic real estate, and housing. Well, so coming back to your very topic, again, sectoral approach, we're very focused on food security, again, on one hand, and on agro or agribusiness on the other hand, because we believe that the two extremes in some ways are linked. Now, when it comes to food security, again, the senior minister rightly pointed out that, this question of 60% of the arable soil of the world are in Africa. When it comes to GDP, the average is what, 50% of the GDP is agriculture. However, in our very region, it rises up to 25%, which would employ 85% of the population. So it is a major topic. And furthermore, in our region, where the population doubles in each and every generation, which means literally that in 25 years, we will be as populated, if not higher populated than the US. So it is a threat. And I have to add that the median age of our population, it's 20 years. It's a hell of a challenge on one hand, but we could also see it as an opportunity. So now, to answer to your very question, we strongly believe at West African Development Bank, at BOAD, we strongly believe in 2 things. The first thing is capital, long-term funding. Answering the question, which is, who takes the first losses? The piece, the equity piece, who takes it? Agriculture requires long-term funding. That's the first thing. The other thing is we strongly believe in technology in the agribusiness, getting higher and higher in the value chain. I think, again, don't want to quote too many times the senior minister, but I think he has rightly said it. So again, sectoral approach, tech, technology, capital, equity, and we believe that considering those elements, this is the way DFAs in general and BWAD in particular will deal with the topic. Thank you.
You so much. You know, you bring up a number of statistics that we keep hearing about: the amount of arable land, the amount of water, the youth, which could pose difficulties, but also is an energetic workforce. And so you have all of these things. And both of our speakers, I believe, talked about Africa has the capacity to feed itself, if not beyond. All of you have talked about that when we were talking earlier. So Beth, I would love if you could look at where are the challenges, where are things going wrong that Africa isn't feeding itself now?
Well, thank you very much, Carol, for that question, and I'm just really honored to be here today, and really appreciated the remarks by Honorable Minister, also by Engineer Honey, and President Ekue today to really talk about sort of what are the issues and what are the potentials. I think that if you look at 246 million Africans going to bed hungry every night, obviously the food insecurity is at a level that's completely unacceptable, and this is really before we saw Russia's war in Ukraine completely disrupt Africa's food systems. And when you see Africa with so much potential that we've been talking about, where a war happens, thousands of miles away, and you see more poor people unable to afford food, and supply chains disrupted, basic staples that Africans depend upon are no longer to be able to import it, we know that there's a problem. So again, there's huge amounts of arable land, as Honorable Minister mentioned. 60%, over 60% of the world's arable but uncultivated land exists in Africa. There's also huge potential for intensification of the land that is cultivated right now to increase yields. Fertilizer, again, huge potential to increase the use of fertilizer, which I know my colleague Patrice will speak about more. And then using improved seeds that are climate adaptive to help farmers dramatically improve yields, which now are about a third in Africa than they are in places like Europe and the United States. And so just really working with farmers to get the inputs they need to dramatically scale up production, which is very important always, but also during this time when fertilizer is less available, less affordable. And so at the African Development Bank, we've stood up really on an emergency basis, the African Emergency Food Production Facility, which is working in real time over the next couple of agricultural seasons to get farmers the inputs they need, both improved climate adaptive seeds and also fertilizer to farmers so that they can scale up production right here. And so Africa not only has the potential to actually feed itself, not be dependent on these very, very lengthy food systems and supply chains from far away that are very fragile, but also to become a breadbasket for the world. And I think that really using this crisis as a forcing event to really get farmers what they need to scale up the production is what we're after. So this is a $1.5 billion facility. We've already been able to approve operations in 27 countries, totaling $1.2 billion to make fertilizer more affordable and, again, to get improved seeds out to farmers at scale. So increasing production is incredibly important. We also know that it's important to really transform the agri-food system and add value to the products that are produced. And I think that, we know that Cote d'Ivoire, being one of the leading producers of cashews in the world, we've seen raw cashews from Cote d'Ivoire be exported to Vietnam for processing, and then come back here, you can buy them in the supermarket. So again, really working to add that value here on the ground. And so we've been working at the African Development Bank with special agro-industrial processing zones in about 13 countries. We've invested over $750 million. A few have been in Cote d'Ivoire. One is the Northern Agropole, which is really taking infrastructure investments and financial incentives to really lower the barriers to entry for these agro-processors to come in and really set up shop in areas of high production and potential to add value to crops. So again, building infrastructure such as roads, electricity connections, ICT connections, water sanitations, buildings that really lower the cost for these businesses to set up, start adding value, really increase market, which will pull the production out of the fields. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I love what you said about a forcing event, that, you know, this is painful what is happening right now with, you know, between COVID and Russia, but that this could really change things looking forward.
And if I could just jump in there, Beth, if you don't mind. I think you, and not to direct away from the need to increase yields, because yields are extremely low in Africa, but a rather controversial point I made in our discussions earlier is Africa actually currently grows enough food to feed itself. Not many people realize that. The amount of calories lost due to food waste equals the amount of calories Africa needs to feed itself. So if we can fix food loss, and we can fix borders and move food around Africa, today it could feed itself. Now that's not to say that we obviously need to improve yields. You know, yields at a third of the rest of the world is not an acceptable level, but we could do it today.
Well, I was going to go through the soil to store, soil to table journey of food and actually come to you last because you're cold storage, or actually second because then we have commodities. But let's start with fertilizer and then we'll go to the cold storage and then we'll go to the commodities. All right, so Patrice, and I believe that you are going to speak, vous préférez de parler en français?
Alors, en tant que seul représentant ivoirien sur ce panel, je vous propose de parler en français.
Get out your headsets.
Okay. Donc, oui, alors les engrais, donc on peut vraiment faire la même analyse que celle que Jared vient de faire, c'est-à-dire que quand on utilise les engrais ici en Afrique, en général, on utilise ces engrais qu'avec une efficacité de 40 à 50%. Donc si on arrive à avoir des meilleurs engrais plus adaptés au sol, on aura déjà une meilleure réponse de ces engrais. Et donc on va pouvoir diminuer mathématiquement le coût de ces engrais et les coûts de production. Maintenant, on est en Afrique subsaharienne à environ 10 millions, entre 10 et 12 millions de tonnes d'engrais consommés par an. Et on est très en retard par rapport à la moyenne mondiale, je pense que tout le monde le sait. On est passé de 8 kilos par hectare et par an à 22 en 15 ans. On a vraiment fait des progrès importants, mais tout a été vraiment mis à mal avec la crise du Covid et la guerre russo-ukrainienne. Donc on s'est rendu compte qu'il faut qu'on soit plus résilient dans les années à venir, et ces années à venir doivent nous permettre de nourrir 2 millions de personnes à l'horizon de 2 milliards de personnes à l'horizon 2050. Nos estimations, c'est qu'il faudrait donc qu'on passe plus ou moins de 10 millions de tonnes à 60 millions de tonnes à l'horizon 2050. Et au cours actuel des engrais, ça veut dire qu'on va avoir des besoins de financement additionnels de l'ordre de 50 milliards de dollars. Alors, c'est des demandes en investissement, mais c'est aussi des business. On doit être en mesure de produire plus localement, alors localement, en tout cas sur notre continent, parce qu'il n'y a pas des réserves et des ressources minières ou des ressources en gaz qui permettent de produire dans chaque pays. Économiquement, ça ne fait pas sens. Une usine de production d'engrais, généralement, vient avec un ticket de l'ordre de 1 milliard à 2 milliards de dollars, mais 5 ans à 10 ans avant d'être en capacité de produire la première tonne. Donc on a besoin d'avoir des réponses immédiates, mais aussi de penser le long terme, et de le penser à l'échelle continentale. Et une des mesures ou une des politiques qu'on souhaiterait vraiment voir se mettre en place, notamment avec la zone de libre-échange, c'est de vraiment faire des engrais une commodité prioritaire, sans frontières, quelles que soient les situations de tension à l'extérieur du continent. Donc ça, c'est un appel. Et si on arrive à faire ça, effectivement, il va falloir qu'on regarde les financements qui vont donc de tickets à 1 milliard, ensuite avec des importateurs ou des mélangeurs qui vont avoir des besoins de financement qui sont plutôt de l'ordre entre 1 et 10 millions de dollars, ensuite des petits distributeurs qui vont avoir besoin de 100 000 à 500 000 $, jusqu'à la distribution au dernier kilomètre qui est la plus compliquée, où là on va avoir besoin de beaucoup d'appui et de technologie pour faire de la microfinance associée à du service technique. Donc il y a beaucoup de choses à faire, on est très optimiste que nous y arriverons. Je pourrais continuer plus tard.
Très bien. Merci beaucoup. So, I think next up we have the cold storage. Talk to us about storage and stopping food loss.
Sure. First of all, to the first question on the role development banks play. So we've got a private equity fund just to handle cold chain in East Africa, and we're looking at doing more in the rest of Africa. But our funding is 50% in volume and 60% in value from DFIs. So we would not have been able to create this fund without DFIs. So thank you very much to our DFI investors. Going back to my previous question or statement around food loss, we particularly deal in the horticultural sector, so we don't deal with grains, but there is a problem with food loss in grains as well in Africa, maybe even larger than the horticultural sector. But the statement I made around total food loss, if we can fix food loss, Africa today could feed itself. Obviously, we also need to fix border issues and be able to move food around, which is another topic. But equally, given the audience, a very important topic that needs to be touched on. And in the horticultural sector, so fruit and vegetables, the only way to preserve those vegetables and fruits is cold chain. And I'll give you a few examples. Potato can be stored for up to 9 months. Most people don't realize that. Apples, unless you've actually eaten an apple off a tree, you've probably never had a fresh apple in your life. Apples can be stored for 12 months. So the ability to solve food loss through storage is significant and key. And it's not just storage, it's the whole cold chain. So it's around getting produce at the farm into a temperature-controlled environment. It's around the logistics. A lot of food gets transported on flatbed trucks in open air. It's around storage in urban areas to be able to collect and distribute the products. So we are very much focused on that at the moment, just in East Africa. We did some very rough numbers that the whole continent of Africa would need about $2 to $2.5 billion investment in cold chain to fix cold chain on the continent. That's not that big. Yeah. Food loss in the horticultural sector is running at 40 to 60%, depending on the products. And you're talking about key products, root vegetables, potatoes. You've got fantastic sectors, and I'll talk about mainly East Africa, in avocados, in mangoes, in pineapples, and they're all operating at 40 to 60% food loss because the product has nowhere to be stored. So I think that while all the other discussions are very important, having the infrastructure in place is also key, because just creating more food to waste at a farm is not the solution. You need to have the infrastructure in Africa to be able to keep that food. And the benefits around that also move into food manufacturing, and I believe it was part of the topic around having less raw products exported out of Africa and food manufacturing happening in Africa. A lot of the food manufacturing companies that we talk to, who will be our customers, are really struggle in Africa because their production facilities need all year round supply of product. Currently, because there is no storage capacities, they are only subject to seasonal harvests. I'll give you one example. There's a fantastic lady in Kenya who creates, in my view, one of the best potato chips called One Stop. She's only able to source potato for 6 months of the year. Her production stops for 4 to 6 months of the year. That is not efficient. On top of that, between harvest season and non-harvest season, the price of potato increases 400%. That absolutely destroys her gross margin, destroys her cash flows. So having the ability for food to be available all year round at constant prices is ultimately key to growing food manufacturing on the continent. Stop there.
Well, thank you so much. That is really interesting, and I'm definitely going to be coming back to Serge and Beth about the investment, because both of you were like, oh, okay. So, but Deepak, first I want to come to you, because you and I were talking about commodity prices. And so you're kind of at the end of this chain of the fertilizer to storing it to getting it to market. And now somebody has to buy it and the price keeps going up.
No, definitely. Thank you. Thank you, first of all, having me here. It's always a pleasure attending such forums across the globe. Right. In terms of prices, I completely agree. The potato is one of the key, food product which a lot of people, continent people consumes. So an increase in such prices will definitely impact the food security. Now, if we talk from the other side, especially this Russia and Ukraine part, when this war started, because of the supply shock which the entire global faced, and that's because of the amount of the export which they control. Both Russia and Ukraine, if I have to put things into perspective, they control around 26% of the wheat exports of the world. Now, when this thing started, when this war started, the export actually went off and they were not supposed to export, which created a supply shock. And the prices of wheat, which was trading at around $300 per metric ton, it went up to $500 per metric ton in just 3-4 months. Another example, very classic example, is Ukraine. If you see, they control around 80% of the vegetable oil. The sunflower oil is what we call. And because they could not export those sunflower oil, the entire pressure came on the other oil, which is like CPO. And because of which the prices of the CPO also went up from around $1,100 per metric ton before the war to around $1,850 metric ton dollar per metric ton during the wartime. Same was the case with fertilizer, because they control a huge amount of fertilizer. So the fertilizer cost went up, and that because they are supplying fertilizer to most of the other countries of the world, it increases the cost of production of the food in other countries as well. And especially Africa was impacted very badly, and that is raising more concern for the food security out here. And no way different, we all know that the kind of energy and the gas prices we all are facing, that also is some way or the other is impacting the food security. So these were, and otherwise the COVID also, which created disruption on the logistic part, because a lot of vessels which is owned by China, they were on a lockdown. The Black Sea port, because of the war, they could not send the vessel and all. This created a disruption on the supply chain as well, which is all adding up to the food security problem we are discussing about.
Well, thank you. That's wonderful. So we've gone through the supply chain throughout, but I think this is really interesting about the, I think it was $2 billion you said to fix it.
$2.5 billion.
Yeah, $2.5 billion. And I would think that there are similar kinds of things in fertilizer, like how do you get that investment? Both of you, sorry, but $2.5 billion from me in my bank account does sound like a bit, but I think you have deeper resources. Yeah. So how do you get those? If that's all it takes, why isn't it done?
Well, let me try to switch to French, because I believe I would define myself as a local player as well. So, en fait, paradoxalement, l'argent n'est pas un problème. Paradoxalement, c'est toujours un peu provocateur que de dire ça, mais l'argent n'est pas un problème. L'argent n'est pas un problème quand vous analysez le monde dans lequel on est, où vous avez un monde qui est en surépargne, qui est fondamentalement en surépargne, un monde vieillissant, occidental en surépargne, en surliquidité. Encore une fois, j'aime bien donner l'exemple du fonds, si on prend un fonds comme CalPERS ou même BlackRock. BlackRock, qui avant la crise ukrainienne était sur le point de détenir 10 trillions. Alors après, au bout d'un moment, on ne sait plus à quoi ressemblent les chiffres, mais bon, 10 trillions de dollars, c'est-à-dire la moitié du PIB américain en gestion en gestion d'actifs. Ce qui est, c'est des montants qu'on ne réalise pas. Alors ça s'explique parce que ça fait 10 ans que les banques centrales n'ont pas arrêté d'injecter de la liquidité dans le système pour de bonnes raisons. Donc ce marché-là existe, c'est le marché des investisseurs. Bien. Et face à ça, et c'est la thèse que nous développons, c'est que nous avons un moteur de croissance dans le monde. Le moteur de croissance, il est ici. Parce qu'une fois de plus, sa population est jeune, on a parlé de la question des terres arables, etc., etc. Donc le sujet pour nous, et le sujet des banques, des DFA et des fonds de private equity, c'est de dire comment est-ce que l'on connecte ces deux mondes, c'est tout. Et notre sujet, c'est d'expliquer aux uns que nous avons les process, nous avons les actifs, nous avons la jeunesse, nous avons le dynamisme, et de dire aux autres, écoutez, organisons-nous de telle sorte que nous soyons capables d'attirer ces investissements. Et je confirme, 2,5 milliards de dollars, c'est piece of cake. Hein.
Si je veux, ah, pardon, Beth. Ok. Donc oui, effectivement, 2,5 milliards de dollars, c'est un morceau de gâteau, c'est
Voilà.
ça?
Un
petit morceau de gâteau.
Petit morceau.
On a vécu une expérience assez intéressante, enfin malheureuse mais intéressante sur ces questions d'accès au financement, avec la BIDC qui a mis à disposition, avec le support d'Afrique Exim et de la BADEA notamment, une ligne de crédit pour faire du OPEX et du CAPEX pour l'industrie des engrais en Afrique de l'Ouest de 540 millions de dollars en 2020. Donc c'était au début de la crise du Covid. Et malheureusement, aucun dollar de cette ligne de crédit n'a pu être utilisé pendant 2 ans. Et ça, on l'explique essentiellement donc, par la volatilité des prix qu'on a connue depuis 2 ans, mais aussi parce que les PME ne sont pas structurées pour pouvoir attraper ces lignes de crédit. Donc, je pense qu'il n'y a aucun problème pour lever 2 milliards de dollars pour faire une usine chez Dangote et AFC et la BAD ont contribué à tous ces augmentations de capacité de production sur le continent et continueront à le faire. Le problème, c'est vraiment comment est-ce qu'on fait pour pouvoir passer ces capacités de financement et permettre aux PME d'investir pour pouvoir fabriquer localement, distribuer localement. Et pour ça, on a vraiment un vrai problème. Et les politiques économiques, la réglementation sont quelque chose qui sont très importantes. La visibilité des programmes agricoles ou des programmes de subvention ou de réponse aux crises sont absolument essentiels. En ce moment, je pense qu'on a vraiment besoin de plus de visibilité et de permettre aux PME de plus facilement accéder à des lignes de financement qui existent. Merci.
Thanks. I think my colleagues have really said it well. I think that at the African Development Bank, we're excited to be part of this $2.5 billion investment. I mean, we're excited about cold chain. I think you brought up a really, really important point about food loss and food waste, right? That's food being produced that is not getting to people's mouths. People aren't profiting from it. It's a tragic waste, and we need to do all we can. So I think that, really the ventures you're doing to really increase cold chain, but it's complicated, right? Getting the funding where it needs to be, making sure that the regulations, the policies are there, food can move across borders. And so it is very complex, and we're here to, I think, work with you all to see how we can get the funding that we have to the right place to really, contribute to continuing to invest to address these problems with cold storage, with food loss, food waste. And I think, as Patrice has brought it back to the broader issue around fertilizer, which is key, right? I think that, if African farmers don't get the fertilizer that they need this year because prices have dramatically increased because of the war in Ukraine, we'll see a 20% reduction in production on top of already, very, very low rates of production and productivity. So that's just devastating. And then again, if you want to go to sort of optimum use of fertilizer, you have to increase so much more. So again, we've been investing at the African Development Bank in fertilizer manufacturing on the continent, which is great. And I think that, we've done, with whatever's in the pipeline, we'll be at like nearly $1 billion. And that's very important to have the production on the continent of fertilizer. So we're, again, not so dependent on importation from thousands of miles away, but then it's important to keep the production in Africa, which that's about finance, right? It's about first of all, there's financing the actors in the fertilizer value chain. Wholesalers, when prices dramatically increase like they have, they don't have the working capital to actually be able to move the product. And so one thing we're doing with our African fertilizer financing mechanism, which is hosted at the African Development Bank, is providing these credit guarantees so wholesalers can, again, move the product and to be able to get it where it needs to go, which is just, it's critical. And then, of course, affordability at the farmer level is incredibly important. And the African Emergency Food Production Facility that I focused on, that I discussed earlier, is really addressing this problem of affordability, you know, at the end user level, and making sure that even if fertilizer prices have increased dramatically, that they will still have the means to actually purchase this fertilizer. So I think that, you know, there's so much to work on at all of these different levels, but it's really critical. In the area of fertilizer, like right now, it's an affordability crisis, but, you know, we will soon get to an actual availability issue coming very soon. So again, we have to work on the fertilizer issue from production to affordability all at the same time, very, very urgently. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Just to continue with what she's saying, you know, the fertilizer, because of this increase in prices because of Russia and Ukraine crisis, and moreover, the you know, the availability of fertilizer across all the pockets, you know, what is happening? The challenge is, you know, the farmers have stopped or have reduced the usage of fertilizer, which indeed is reducing the yield. But we should always remember the mistake which Sri Lanka did in 2021 when they replaced or when they stopped using the synthetic fertilizer, and which ultimately resulted into a 40% drop of their rice production in 2022. And there is a reduction of around 15% on their tea production, which ultimately Sri Lanka used to export. If you see some of the countries in this continent, if you see example of Nigeria, they ultimately, they have so much production of urea that they export to countries like Brazil, India, and US. So they have overcapacity for urea. If you take example of Morocco, they have phosphate, which there is huge in huge quantity. We are talking about DRC, wherein there might be a very huge reserves of potash for that. So there is not that, and we need to see that how we can replicate the same model into other countries out here in the continent, so that we can have more fertilizer, we can evaluate more soil and can find out fertilizer and can be self-sufficient rather than being dependent on European or other Western countries.
So they have told me that I am to keep to the time, which is very unfortunate, because this is one of those situations where, you know, it seems like it shouldn't be that complicated, and the more you delve into it, the more you realize it's really complicated. There's a lot to unpack here, and we didn't just need an hour and a half for the whole thing. We needed days and days for this. But unfortunately, we are almost out of time. I want to just have each of you have some closing thoughts. And really, the things that really strike me, I think, Beth, you had said earlier that yields in Africa are about a third of what they are in Africa. And then the issue of food loss, that it seems like we have the potential to be able to solve this. If we can get yields up, if we can protect food so that it actually gets to market and doesn't get lost. What is it that we're missing here? What needs to be done? And if I can just go down, just very quickly, what needs to be done?
All right. Deux, trois éléments. L'agriculture est, comme je le disais, centrale en ce que c'est un élément de sécurité alimentaire, naturellement, de sécurité de nos populations, de sédentarisation de nos populations, mais c'est également un sujet de richesse, d'exportation. Alors, non pas simplement d'exportation en dehors du continent, mais déjà, nous en discutions ce matin, sujet d'exportation rien qu'en Afrique. Nous avons un potentiel énorme. Donc, je pense que remettre l'agriculture comme un élément central de nos politique publique, mais également en impliquant au maximum le secteur privé, parce que je pense que tout ce qui relève des technologies, tout ce qui relève notamment l'utilisation des drones, les négociations sur les je sais plus comment dire en français d'ailleurs, fertilisers, c'est les engrais, voilà. Voilà, tout ceci implique un écosystème dans lequel nous retrouvons naturellement le secteur public, mais également le secteur privé.
Très bien, merci. Beth.
Agricultural transformation is critical to really transformation of economies in general. It's really sort of the center upon which the rest of it all happens. I think that food security and agriculture is something that the world focuses on during times of crisis. And in times of crisis, attention is often diverted away. I think we really need to continue our focus on agriculture, on agricultural transformation, and increase investment in agriculture. Yes, financing isn't necessarily the only problem, but we need to ensure that governments, private sector, other actors keep their focus, their attention, their investment on agriculture. We get the right policies in place, and in the end, it's the private sector that needs to come in, take the risk to invest in agriculture in Africa, because it's where money's to be made and it will pay off.
Thank you.
I would ask everybody in the room to look at the continent and success stories in the continent. You know, if you look around in all of the sectors we're talking about, there are very good examples that could quite easily be replicated. So you know, smallhold farmers is an issue, and that's an issue in yields. If you look at what Ethiopia is doing around clustering smallhold farmers, catering to certain products, they're having some very good successes. That's a policy, you know, adapted to your own region, country, culture, but that's a great example of how you can try to get over the smallhold farmer issue in yields. Look at technology examples. There's some brilliant African technology businesses in the agricultural space. There's one in Kenya that's pretty famous, Twiga, that is matching smallhold farmers and farmers to consumers without a significant infrastructure or retail in the middle. Look at businesses like ours that are trying to do the infrastructure basis. Because I think there are plenty of examples out there that could quite easily be copied and replicated that would make a drastic change very quickly.
Well, in order to, as a solution, basically, a long-term solution, because it's not a short-term goal, it's a long shot which we have to play. So I personally would put and will summarize into 3 A's. One is, the availability, wherein the farmers are made available of good quality of seeds and fertilizer, wherein you have to invest on the infrastructure part, the storage part, so that they can store it for the long time, wherein the cold storage or something which comes into picture. There is second one, which is affordability, wherein the financial institution or the banks like AfDB comes into picture, wherein they have been given a very low, low interest rate finance or a very affordable financing. And at the same time, when they are selling their end product, it is sold at a proper market price. And the third, last but not the least, it is the accessibility, which means that whatever the farmers have produced and when it has converted into the one which can be consumed, that is accessible to all the part of the country, and it goes to each and every corner. Because remember, it's food insecurity, it's not just about deep hunger or famine. It is also about wherein, the famous economist Amartya Sen said that, boss, if you have food available, but still, if it is not accessible to some part of that continent, that itself is a food insecurity.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Patrice, please.
Merci. Deepak a volé mes 3 A, donc je vais être obligé de trouver autre chose pour conclure. You've stolen my 3 A's.
Okay.
Yeah, bon, les engrais, cette fois je vais la faire en anglais. Because we have to think fertilizers as an investment, well, a sector where you can invest within a sector that will worth $50 billion. $50 billion market value. And fertilizers can give you 5 things. It can give you food, it can grow fuel, it can grow fodder, it can grow fiber, and it can grow animal feed. So with fertilizers, I think agriculture is not about food only. It's more than that, and there's a huge potential. So I'm inviting everybody in the room to invest, to build the economic resilience through sustainable investment in the fertilizer sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Well, Serge Ekue, Beth Dunford, I keep looking for who was next. It's out of order. Jared Irving, Deepak Bojek, and Patrice Anakin. Thank you so much for being with us. I wish we had more time, but this has been a fantastic discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.